So, questions? Andrew?
So the biggest concern that I have about this approach is that this is, whether we like it or not, a proposal to fork the root. And it's a proposal to fork the root for one specific purpose. But at bottom, just as a fact of math, you've got two NS sets at the bottom of this tree, and they're different. And therefore, since trees can't have two roots, you've got two roots. You've got to pick which one you're in. So if you're going to have one internet, you're going to have to pick, which version of this thing you're in, and then you're on the left side of the internet or the right side of the internet, and you can't move from the left to the right side. Now, the argument is, well, we'll make sure that the left zone and the right zone have all the same contents with the exception of this one RR set that is different. And I guess what I wonder is, what makes you think that the layer 9 and above world is going to accept that since it was okay to introduce a difference for just this one technical difference that we decided was important, why other differences wouldn't be acceptable also for just those one technical differences that were important. And if it's acceptable actually at that point to make just one difference, well, you say, well, no, but the people in the right side need to have access to the same data as the one on the left side. Well, it's just one technical difference, so now I can see a combinatorial explosion possibility here where everybody who has one technical difference has to be reflected in all of the things, and we've got a large number of versions of this. And this sounds to me like the old world in which I had to, reflect all of my stuff in CompuServe and Genie and all the rest of that, and that sucked. So I would like not to have that happen again.
All right, I have three answers, but first let me say that I have to reflect my set of friends in Google+, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and I hate that. But
yeah, but that's a problem. I suggest.
I'm just saying that we can't treat that as the end of the world kind of problem. But I have three actual answers to you. First, you said, and you can't move from the left to the right. I think that's false. By design, this is set up so that if an application is sharing data with other applications where not all applications are on the same side, they will have no confusion whatsoever. This is not the same as the incoherence that's introduced by CDNs, for example. But I want to note that in Akamai's proposal for how they're going to handle DNSSEC and still give different people different A record and quad A record sets based on where they are, is they're going to sign every variation of that RR set with a key that validates correctly, which means that if you get good data, you'll know it's good, and if you get bad data, you'll know it's bad. But they, in fact, intend to fork every RR set. And as long as we only traverse this thing in one direction, that works. Now, to your more important question, why will the layer 9 folks not treat this as open season? Okay, so you guys have finally broken ranks. You finally admitted that there can be more than one root server or root zone. So now we're going to go to town on that and find all kinds of really chaotic ways to use the loophole that you've created for us. Ultimately, I believe that those people will be looking to the people in this room, and people like the people in this room, to understand the actual policy implications of this. And yes, there will be a discussion about how this allows people to do some chaotic thing that means that we no longer have one world, one internet, and one namespace, and we will have to fight that. But I believe that it is inevitable not only that we will fight it, but that we will win. And I don't want to not do this on that basis. There may be a basis for not doing this, but I don't want that to be it. Obviously, the consensus of the IETF DNSOP working group is what actually determines whether your objection is sustained. But I'm letting you know my own view about your objection. James.
I share a little bit similar concern to Andrew. And actually, your last answer on layer 8 or layer 9 doesn't really convince me that it's going to be the case. Because more likely than not, they're going to decide, and with or without DNS agreement on whether anyone in this room. If the national state come together to decide certain things, they will. But having said that, I do support your proposal in general because the similarity of the AS112 and the way that it works and how it actually able to scale to make the DNS more distributed, at least on the root zone file, is what I support. And I think we spoke about that during the ITI panel, and I support that this general concept, just not the way that you propose to fork the root. The moment we go down the path of saying that we have a second set of root server, or I can publish a second set of root server, then we are in trouble. We will be in trouble. I would really advise to going against that. Having said that, I'm just wondering why didn't you consider a separate possibility, which is taking one of the existing 13 root server. I'm not going to say which one. I'm just saying one. Okay, I can manage just 2 of that. Take one of that and implement this proposal. What's wrong with doing that?
So the reason I did not think of sort of just keeping the 13 that we have, but repurposing one of them to be unowned anycast, I had a couple of reasons. One is that there's a big layer 9 concern of finding some root server operators willing to volunteer for that treatment. Could be very difficult. But second, there's a non-political reason, which is the way that Bind and some other recursive servers go about deciding which authority server to use for a certain zone cut is by sending 1 or 2 queries to each of them and then figuring out which one was closest and then using the closest one for a while, and it gradually decays and you eventually get back into probe mode where you have to leak a few queries to the other 12 servers or the other 24 addresses, depending on how you look at it. And that information leakage is still a surveillance problem. It's much smaller, but it's still a problem. And the timeouts that you'll get if you go off net and you can't reach the other 24 out of the, you're only, you have one of the 25 in-house and the other 24 upstream from you, you lose that connection, you're going to have a lot of timeouts while those servers, while the recursive servers in your network discover that 24 of the 25 addresses are no longer reachable. So those were my reasons for not proposing it in that direction. PVM, your hand was next.
So yeah, but just quick comment back to you. Number one, I don't believe that we cannot find one of the 13 root server to work with this. If we can get US government to give an INR transition, well, then giving this up will just be part of that minor thing that they give up. Right. So it's not impossible. The second thing is that if we can get one to work on this unowned anycast, right, the ideal world is to get all 13 of them to work in that manner. Not going to happen today, and I don't think so, right? There will be root server operator to fight to death that they will not do it. But if we can get at some stage in time in the future, in the next 100 years, well, maybe that will work. So I don't see anything wrong with that. The civilian problem is a minor problem, honestly.
My experience, and there's a lot of stories I can't tell because of the sort of secret handshake oaths, but my experience being a root name server operator since 1996 is that most of us cherish our relevance. PVM.
You have, in your scheme, you have the 4 new magic addresses, right, at which the serve. And if what you did is you distributed the traditional root zone file through those, then this scheme would still work modulo the fact that people would, if they sent a query off for .dot, discover that there were the traditional 13 root servers, right?
That's correct.
But
So the priming query would be the only one that could go to all 4. The rest would go to the 13.
So if you're sort of forking the root, or whatever you want to call that problem, you could probably figure out how to just distribute the traditional root zone file through these 4 new magic addresses. And actually, you wouldn't really require anybody's authority to go do that, right?
Distributing the root does not require these 4 addresses. That's.
I'm just saying, if you created these 4 addresses and then made your service available through these addresses, you could do that without requiring any changes by IANA or anything.
In my opinion, for this to be effective, it has to be DNSSEC signed with the IANA root zone signing key. And so the only way we can get that to happen is if the IETF approves this and directs the IANA to create a second stream. Because if you don't have a
Why
different,
don't you use the original one?
because if you, well, then,
I mean, basically, you're just saying stub to these 4 magic addresses for the root.
well, stub is a bind feature. Not every name server has it.
Most name servers have a feature that's equivalent.
So this sounds like a hybrid proposal between the Kamari-Hoffman proposal and this one, where it still requires that every recursive server change its configuration and perhaps update its code to be able to do to use different root name servers. But it would not require every recursive server to have one on its own loopback. So I think that's worth adding as a section of this document as a possible alternative. Warren?
So one of my concerns, I think, is fairly similar to Andrew's, and I think I disagree with one of the points in your slides. It seems, and I apologize for the idiom, that this is a little bit like letting the camel's nose into the tent. Once this becomes the way that this, an acceptable way for this to happen, it becomes fairly easy to then say, this is how you should do it. And so we will block access to the other addresses. Therefore, everybody should do this. Once everybody is doing this, it becomes easy to then say, now that you're doing this and you're sort of captive to this specific infrastructure, here is a new set of information that you should start handing out. And you don't really have a alternative at that point. If the other ones are blocked because, this was obviously the way to go, you don't have an alternate source for the information. And that's a long-term progression, potentially.
So
Yeah, that one.
what I want to say is in the progression of networks, where you start unwinding from the loopback toward the core, you currently trust everybody in that path to either deliver or otherwise properly handle your packets. Now, I realize there are many hotel rooms that don't honor that, and so almost all of us have VPN solutions. I don't think that we can change that, no matter what we do. You're going to either trust everybody between you and the core, or you're going to be using VPNs. So I understand that this could be used as a hammer to get, let's say, North Korea's in the news this week, so let's say get North Korea to have its own internet namespace. But they could do that pretty easily anyway. So just as we don't have a lot of choice about who's between us and the core, we don't have a lot of choice about the national laws that we have to comply with. So I don't see this as a new thing other than the fact that we're anointing it as a correct way to operate, and that will then create temptation that might not be present today.
Yeah, I think the difference is the sort of anointing it or making it more
Okay.
acceptable as a.
Which of my slides did you think had an error?
So I think it was just the next one, the one where it said that therefore people will be less likely, or there will be less temptation
Oh, yes.
to make the namespace look like you think it should look. That one.
Yeah.
Once avoid the temptation, that I think it increases the temptation. But philosophical point.
Well, it's a philosophical point that I can address by saying something about that as a known risk, because we ought to detail the risks when we make a proposal to change the way the internet is governed. Johan.
Yes. So it's probably no surprise to you that I'm concerned about this. I'm still concerned about the recursive side here, because yes, I realize that it requires some sort of opt-in on the part of the recursive server operator changing to a different hints file to sort of initially switch over to this alternate root thing. And at that time, presumably the content of the alternate root is remarkably similar to the content of, well, the traditional root, the change being just the NSRR set. But as we spoke about previously during the Hoffman-Kamari presentation. My view, and I'm probably not alone with this, my view is that it's really, really difficult to get in touch with these recursive server operators. So here we have someone who switches over to this because they read the commercial that says they will get better service this way because it's closer and it's local and everything is fine. And they sort of look into it for 5 minutes and they see, yeah, it sort of works. That's fine. I'll switch over. Now I have much better service. What if? Which is the so-called proverbial engineering question. What if? What if this is no longer true in the future? What if we start seeing other stuff? What if we see more bifurcations, changes, local additions, local removals, whatever? What is the plan B?
So I think when I've mentioned an airport that had its own internet namespace, we all know which airport I was talking about and what TLD worked if you were on that airport's wireless, but no one else's. It's not true today, but it was true for a good 10 years. And in the absence of DNSSEC, you cannot stop somebody from adding policy routing so that when you try to reach the root name servers, your packet is dragged off, gone sideways, and fed into a local server that has its own namespace. So my contention is that DNSSEC makes it possible for an interested, motivated, educated RDNS operator to avoid the danger that you just said. And that in the absence of either the motivation, the interest, or the clue, they are already susceptible to the danger that you are describing.
I think you're making a slightly flawed comparison here, because in the airport case, it's actually the recursive server operator doing the wrong thing. He is manipulating the namespace. In this particular case, it's not. The recursive server operator, the guy we're having trouble getting in contact with, is not the bad party. He's trying to do the right thing. He just read the wrong commercial of where to get good service for the right information. He's the victim, and his customers are subsequent victims. There is a major difference there. Okay,
so you're proposing that there could be effectively a pirate radio station that you are within hearing distance of, so your packets are going to an RDNS operator, to an authority server operator within your routing domain somewhere upstream of you, and that they might decide to give you data that is different from the normal IANA route. I am hoping that fails spectacularly every time it's tried because DNSSEC keeps it from getting traction. I can't do anything about the people who won't turn on DNSSEC validation, but I can tell you that in this draft, as in the Kumari-Hoffman draft, it's going to come as a package deal, which is if you want this, first turn on DNSSEC. And here is RFC 5011, where you can subscribe to the root zone key if it ever changes and so forth. Here's how to do DNSSEC validation, and then once you've got that working, you can change your hints files. If somebody just changes their hints file to the point where they are willing to believe anything they hear, they don't need 4 name server addresses instead of 25 in order to be susceptible to it. They're already at that risk.
Most of them are actually in that boat, the boat where they believe anything they hear, as you know.
Well, so we can hope that if they see, and you described that if they see the commercial for this and they decide to make the change, we can hope that there is no commercial that fails to warn them that they also need DNSSEC. Because one thing I'm fairly sure of is that IANA is not part of the risk matrix here. I'm not worried that once this is done, that somehow IANA's current contractor or whatever governance model evolves for it is going to say, now that we've got 2 root zones, let's put different data in each of them. Those people are not going to do that. They're going to say, yes, the only difference is the NS record, and we're going to sign it with the same key because that's what the IAB approved. And that's whatever the governance body approved. So my concern is not about spurious behavior by IANA, but rather spurious behavior by other operators who are between you and the core, or who can cause your packets to then reach their servers. if we don't have DNSSEC for that, we already have a fair number of risks that you and I have agreed over the years are unacceptable. So yes, this adds to the risk and to the unacceptability, but it doesn't create it. Terry.
I'm very nervous about having another root zone. Very nervous. I really do believe in the uniqueness of the zone. You say namespace, I see that, but I read zone. So while you promote that the namespace would be the same, I see two separate namespaces represented by two zones. So that scares me a lot. And the ongoing political aspects that Andrew mentioned and others have alluded to scare me as well. So that would make me extremely nervous. One thing that I think raises the hairs on the back of my neck about this takes me back to the 6-4 Anycast days, where it was unowned. It was a global Anycast thing, and when 6-4 didn't work, it was primarily because people weren't operating their Anycast gateways appropriately, and that caused issues. And we could never find out and contact those people and make them fix it, and that was a problem. So you have a scoping issue here. If you could make this local scope only, if you could bring this back to intra-AS, and if you could, if you want to use the RPKI analogy, issue a AS0 ROA, then that might be more palatable. It brings it back just to the organization wanting to do this, and leakage should not occur. The admin responsibility of that is that if you're going to go down this track, this is what you need to do. I probably concur with PVM's observation that I don't really think you need to have a separate zone for this. I don't think you really do need to have those extra name servers in the NS set. The hints file gives you that for the priming query. Yeah? So...
Well,
Pindar.
I mean, this is a meta comment, but in some sense, I see it from a shifting problem to sort of one key to rule them all kind of argument. So I think it's really healthy that we're exploring what I would see as not best common practices, but the other alternative. So I think that's very healthy that it's been done. But and I think that actually sort of what I would call, speaking about sort of worst common practices, recognizing that what's already happening in industry and labeling it as such, and managing the risks and articulating the risk is a healthy exercise. But the finesse is the messaging of whether or not, to what degree you're legitimizing it by doing that. And I don't have an answer for that.
Mr. Hoffman.
So, as I said in my presentation, I think it's really important to look at use cases. And you started off by saying that there were two for this, which were external dependencies and external surveillance. To be honest, I have a hard time believing the external dependency one, because if you are so disconnected from the current root name servers that this would help, that would mean that that the name you were looking for was simply a TLD, followed by either you were just looking for the TLD or you were looking for something within a very local space. And I believe we really are probably talking about the ISP level here that would be useful. So I don't think that one actually makes much sense in today's world. I believe that there are a very small number of people who might have that issue, but I think that the number where having access to the root zone, but not to other normal TLDs other than maybe one that they care about, that's real limited. It might be even as limited as the number of recursives that are useful for our draft. I mean, I think it's that edgy. So let's talk about the surveillance one for a moment. Two thoughts come to mind. One is what you're proposing is saying to people, if you have a concern for surveillance, use this new alternate, set, and you're not going to know how far your queries are going to go up the tree. There might be somebody very close in the hierarchy who is running this, and that's great because then surveillance has to be close. But there might not be, and so it might be further up. So you're talking to people who are concerned about surveillance and telling them this will help, and we don't know how much. I don't think those people are going to buy that much. They're either going to want surveillance protection or not. There are proposals to get much better surveillance protection, things like QNAME minimization and such like that, which I think, for one thing, don't take any changes to IANA, but also don't take any changes to the current root server operators. So given those two use cases, even though what you've described here has positive and negative aspects, I don't think that it's actually solving the use cases that are important that you've mentioned. Again, I don't happen to consider the first one that important. I very much consider the surveillance one important. And I do think that QNAME minimization would be a trivial way to get in, huge amounts of surveillance protection without any of the layer 8 and above overhead that either yours requires or that ours would require. I mean, ours doesn't take any layer 8 overhead, but it does add a lot of, it's going to break eventually maybe for some people.
So let me say, in answer to your observation that you don't see the external dependency as compelling,
For many. I think it's for a limited number.
so I certainly know of some for whom it is compelling, but you're right, I don't know. We have something like 2 billion connected devices, and I know a vanishingly small percentage of them personally, so I'm not claiming to have asked a representative sample. On the surveillance question, I've got two other more subtle points to answer with. One is query minimization is good, and I did not cover it in the draft that I sent last night, but I recognize that I need to cover that topic in order to really explain my views on this. I think query minimization is a good idea, and I think it's going to go forward. But it doesn't stop you from leaking the fact that you were interested in something that was in a certain TLD. It doesn't maybe leak the entire QNAME, and so it's better, but it doesn't necessarily solve the surveillance problem in the way that the TLS proposal for DNS would do, or could do. But more so, I really envision network operators and recursive operators deciding to cooperate, so that if, let's say, you cared about surveillance and that was your motive for adopting this plan, you would be likely to deliberately provision servers that would respond to these addresses somewhere between yourself and the core. And you would provision a firewall just up from there to make sure that if they were down, you were down. And so that might be that you do that in your LAN or on your host or your campus, ISP, etc. And if you can't, then you would say, this doesn't not solve my surveillance problem. I'm not going to waste my time on it. So this really is, in the internet tradition, a way for people whose interests are aligned to cooperate along some shared signaling path, more so than some magic bullet that solves this problem without anybody having to coordinate anything. Yeah.
Dr. Ma from ZDS. I think your proposal is very creative, but relies heavily on the networking. If the responded server with the anycast address is a rogue one, what should the resolver do? And according to the mechanism, the anycast mechanism, the resolver will query the responded server again or something else. I think it's kind of complicated. As far as I know, the current root name server architecture is the same, but the certain name operators have reputations. So what's your proposal is to do with that? Thank you.
So I agree that the current system is extremely strong. I've gone on record publicly as noting that the 13 root servers operated by the 12 operators, these predate the existence of ICANN. And so when people ask, why are we non-contracted parties, It's like, well, we were here first, so why would we sign a contract with somebody who just came into existence and said, yes, we're now your boss? Well, actually, no. I have a boss. I have constituents already. So the reputations, both for service and ethics, that go with the 12 existing root server operators are one of the great strengths of the Internet. And I cannot say that this proposal is as good as that. This is a different way of doing it, not meant to replace, but meant to add alternatives. But to your first question, could you repeat your first question?
If the responded server with the anycast address is a rogue one.
Thank you. So right now the proposal says 2 servers, and I mentioned that there's some possibility that 2 is not enough. No matter what the number is, whether it's 2, 3, 4, 13, whatever it is possible for someone upstream to intercept all the traffic that you want to send to all of those addresses. Now, a lot of decisions get made by the Internet community as if it had a mind, believe it or not. And it tends to favor first mover, the first adopters. There's a great first mover rule setting capability that we see. So the reason that I mentioned that this proposal rests on a foundation of DNSSEC validation is that what I want to do is to have it be that if somebody wants to intercept your traffic, and there will certainly be people who are motivated to do that, whether for criminal reasons or ideological reasons or what have you, I want them to know that anything they do will cause you to go dark. That under no possible conditions will you ever believe anything they tell you that isn't signed by IANA, and that they are not, that they don't have the choice of somehow twisting your arm and getting them to believe their data. All they can do is cause you to have no service because you won't believe an unsigned answer. And so if we can get DNSSEC into the fabric first, then I don't believe that a party who can intercept your traffic has any capability that they will find useful. James.
Maybe.
Oh, I'm sorry, please. Yeah.
So, Edmund Chung here. I wanted to go back to, are we in the open discussion with both now? Because I wanted to kind of make a comment about the...
It's 12:15 now, so
Then we're definitely well into the part where we should be discussing both.
Okay,
I'll sit down.
in that case, I wanted to go back to what Paul Macapetros said, and I think Paul, Vixie, you mentioned the hybrid concept, which kind of brought out, and make 2 observations. One, all the concerns or criticisms against both proposals in fact seems to be the same. Like, and both of those risks seems to be resolved by at least by both authors to be relying on DNSSEC, right? So so that's one observation. The other one is with Paul Hoffman and Paul Vixie here, the question is, what if I wanted to explore further what the hybrid solution might look like. Let's say we do have the stub or the hint extra hint file as those four IP addresses. Wouldn't that just work? Because both cases both cases can exist, and they're not mutually exclusive in this case. In the original 13 server root, you can still have the stub root that goes to what Vixie is suggesting, and have that signed by IANA, and so the hint file will just contain those those 2 name servers and four IP addresses, and the unknown anycast. So I'm curious what Hoffman and Vixie think about that, really merging the 2 as a recommendation. Because right now, all the concerns that other people are talking about already can exist. I mean, ISPs are doing this already, and what Mixie is saying is that any rogue thing can still happen regardless of what, if that's implemented. So just curious.
I wanted to start by saying that remember on the use cases, the use case for our document is infinitely smaller than the use case for Paul's. So, and Jeff Houston, if you're sitting near a mic, you can talk to us a little bit about what is the current amount of DNSSEC deployment. You came up with that in the last couple of months, but I believe the number is hideously low, and therefore that making an assumption that it's all fixed by DNSSEC is somewhat wrong, and therefore ours requiring DNSSEC is requiring on many, many, many fewer places than Paul's would. So, Jeff, do you have the numbers off the top of your head?
I'll keep on pressing buttons. Around 22% of users send their queries to resolvers that perform DNSSEC validation. But half of those users have a second resolver and don't interpret serve fail as absolute. And so 22% of folk do the DNSSEC dance. They validate responses. But if it's badly signed and they get back a serve fail, they flop to their second resolver, and half of those folk, their second resolver does not validate. So 10% of the world's users, whatever that is, 200 million or something, don't accept bad. Another 10% accept bad, and the other 80% don't do the dance at all. So 20% of folk is a lot of folk. It's not that DNSSEC is invisible. It's remarkably visible. V6 would kill for that number.
Yeah, I guess a very short thing. While both things require DNSSEC, I think if one ends up in a scenario where one's captive to a specific set of name servers or whatever, requiring DNSSEC is great. However, what does an ISP do when DNSSEC breaks? I mean, the obvious correct thing to do is just not return any answers. Unfortunately, in the real world, what happens is your customers call up and scream at you, and you say, I can either not return any answers, and everybody calls, or I can just turn off DNSSEC. And the latter, unfortunately, is what everybody will do. If you can't provide any service, something that's potentially correct some of the time is better than answering calls.
So, Jeff, since this is a question to the two draft authors, I want to answer it. If we don't get to you before lunch, we'll pick up immediately after lunch with your
I'm in the queue.
So, I need to work through the idea of merging these, because if we could come up with an enterprise-only address that can't appear on the global routing table, and then find a way to do some kind of a stub or forwarding zone trick so that those servers could be designated by participating recursives, that's a compelling solution. If we keep this data out of the global routing system, that gives us a much clearer use case. On the other hand, the reason I have to work through it is my current proposal requires no code changes. There's no new feature, there's no missing interpretation, there's no other different way to do forwarding or stubbing or anything like that. You can do it with just any name server you have on hand. Any authoritative or recursive name server that you have on hand will allow you to do this, whereas the other proposal here is going to require that these operators the implementers make a few changes. And I'm concerned about the idea of changing the hints file but pointing at an existing zone that has the existing 13 NS records, because when I used to write name server code, that really meant that only that first priming query would go to the hints, and that after that you would replace the NS record set with the one you got from the priming query, and it wouldn't matter. So this really is going to require the same changes to recursive DNS logic that the Kamari and Hoffman proposal would require. And I was trying to avoid that. On the other hand, I'm hearing loud and clear in this room that there are a lot of reasons for concern around this proposal, and so I should certainly update the draft to include this as an alternative, and thank you for mentioning it. Did somebody want to speak other than Jeff before lunch? Oh,
Me.
a lot of you.
I'm in the queue.
All right, we have 7 minutes until 30 minutes after the hour. So
I'll keep it short. I'll keep it very quick. Just. Yeah. So, first of all, I don't think that's worthwhile to merge the two documents. I think they solve two different set of problems, and they ought to exist independently. They're actually two different set of problems, and I won't repeat myself. Okay. The second point is that back to your proposal, which I like and I support, and I do hear Johan's comment that he's concerned about road. One point is that road data always exists, people that will intercept data, and there needs to be certain level of trust in between. But what if there's really a road actors within the chain of trust, and what can you do? So your proposal actually has one obvious answer, which I don't think that you didn't answer, Johan, which is if an ISP or recursive server that operates, that recursive server finds that it's upstream or is broadcasted, only anycast IP addresses give wrong data, then they could run their own local version of that anycast, and the damage can be minimized. But having said that, I think that's very good operation value to consider having the anycast as a no broadcast to limit the damage.
Johan.
So just to get back to James immediately, I agree with that, and I think one way of phrasing that particular concern and problem is that the rogue operator, if we use that term, would be a different entity from the recursive server operator, because once it's out in the global PGP system, it could be basically anyone, anywhere. It could be close to you, it could be yourself, but it could also be someone else, and that's obviously a problem. But that brings me to the reason I asked for the microphone, because Paul asked for, in thinking about unification of proposals, never mind whether that's a good idea or not. You said 2 minutes ago whether there was a way for us to keep this local to the enterprise and not have it escape onto the public network. So we're sufficiently close to lunchtime to have the crazy talk, and here's the crazy talk. So why not make a requirement that these new addresses are RFC 1918 space inside the enterprise? You can have whatever routing policy you want, but it couldn't escape because it will go down AS112 immediately.
I'm interested in discussing that over lunch. Let me say so there are problems, but possible solutions to those problems.
I
don't
agree
wanna
with
go
all of
deep
that,
on it
but
right
I said
now.
it was crazy
But
talk.
what I wanted to say is there is an important reason why both the Hoffman-Kamari proposal and my proposal rely on DNSSEC, and that is we need DNSSEC anyway. Right? Those of us who've spent a lot of the last 16, 17 years working on DNSSEC did not do it because we thought it would be fun. We did it because we thought that the world needed it. Now, I realize that right now we're in a place where we're arguing about whether negative trust anchors should be a standard because DNSSEC is broken so often that we need an interoperable way to turn it off. That can't last forever. We have to get to the point where turning off DNSSEC is not the first reaction when it doesn't work well, or we have just wasted 16 years, and I'm not ready to kiss off the 16 years of effort. So this has to come with DNSSEC, and it is, in my opinion, capable of increasing Jeff's 22% number because the people that are interested in this will be told, by the way, you have to have DNSSEC before you can turn it on. So if I thought DNSSEC deployment was going to go no further and that it wasn't someday going to be ubiquitous, I wouldn't have made this proposal. I would say it's too damn dangerous to let anybody give anybody a root answer. So on the crazy talk thing, I know that A lot of people are already using the existing 1918 space, and they completely allocated it. And if we said, no, this corner has actually got some distinguished purposes to it, then a lot of people would scream bloody murder. So what would have to happen is the IETF would have to ask for additional space for this purpose, and then there'd have to be a rule that it never shows up on the global backbone. Jeff, you have 2 minutes.
I'll take one of them. I guess this is the closest mic. Just really quickly, Jeff Osborne, ISC. There's a presumption, I think, in both of these proposals that given that there's inadequate route, there are inadequate route instances out there and so on. I just want to say, at least speaking for FRoot, we are wildly available and free, have stacked free servers in the back. I have a board meeting tomorrow. Another 40 are being approved. All you need is power, bandwidth, and it'd be nice if you had a clue. We'll put one anywhere, anywhere at all. So just, it sounded as if, given that there are a fixed number and the application process takes 8 years, then therefore. So I just want to make that real clear, and I hope that was less than 30 seconds.
It was, but let me say that I don't believe you're capable of managing the millions of servers that I think the billions of stubs require. So I know that you're going to probably be up over 1,000 within my lifetime. I just don't see you reaching millions.
Again, I think the whole point is the places that are distant enough and at the edge enough of the newly emerging internet technology thing simply mirror what happened with cell phones, the original internet, the telephone when my great-grandfather was doing this. The edges are always slow to catch up, and what they need is additional and modern infrastructure and a little money and a little time rather than breaking the protocols. Just a guess.
Yeah, I have one last remark. I suggest that one of the things we need to work on is how we want to break this problem up. My favorite way to break this problem up is to say, if you have a copy of a zone that's authentic because it's DNSSEC signed or some other golden seal on it, how can you use that locally? And the second problem would be, how can you acquire those copies? Because I think that's really the issues that are here. And I'd encourage you to think more globally than just the DNS root zone, because I think that people can use this within their enterprises in order to increase their security with their own digitally signed stuff, and that what we ought to do is to put forward a way to do that so that maybe even DNSSEC within the enterprise can be commonly accepted as the default.